This generation always new points of view. All walks of life, spreading the light. And in time it will see you through. Log on, talking with Tom. Log on. Log on, talking with Tom. Log on, talking with Tom.
Welcome to Talking with Tom. I'm Tom Dacey alongside Ed McCarver, and thank you to Doug Allen and Isabella. Good evening, Edward.
Good evening, Tom. Yeah, it's nice to hear that song again. We haven't heard that in a while. It's nice to be back on the air again.
That's our new and improved version of Talking with Tom, direct from Nashville, Tennessee.
Still having technical difficulties?
You're frozen, Ed.
Yes.
There you are. Wait a minute.
Yep. Doug Allen, who's a past guest, and Doug's been a legend on our show over the years, and it was nice of him to record that intro for us.
We have a very special show this evening. We are welcoming the Democratic mayoral candidate, Riley O'Connell. Ed, you want to tell us a little bit about our guest?
Yep. Be glad to. I have his bio here very quickly. Riley O'Connell is a fifth generation Wallingfordian, the oldest of three brothers. His father is a local business owner, and his mother is a public school teacher. Now, Riley grew up attending Pond Hill Elementary and Dag Hammarskjöld Middle School before diverging from the long-held family tradition of attending Lyman Hall High School by matriculating to Choate Rosemary Hall instead, where he would go on to graduate with cum laude distinction. He later earned his bachelor's degree at Bowdoin College, where he double majored in legal studies and environmental studies with a minor in psychology. O'Connell has spent the past 3 years working in the Criminal Investigations Unit of the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. And I may say on a personal note, 2 weeks ago, I know Riley hopes to win the race 1 month from now, but a couple of weeks ago, he beat me by about 5 minutes in the Fishbine Road race. I had the privilege, and I wore the T-shirt right here from the race. Not only, Tom, did Riley beat me, but his dog Brunswick beat me too. They both, I ate their dust.
No big surprise.
Yeah. Nice job. I didn't get a chance to meet you at the race, Riley. You were too fast for me.
So without further ado, please welcome Riley O'Connell. Welcome, Riley.
Well, thank you both so much for having me. And I gotta say to Ed, to be fair, Brunswick, my dog, was pulling me most of the way. So I think you might have beaten me if I didn't, working as a dog sled, essentially.
More like an Iditarod.
Yes, exactly.
Riley, I want to start out by asking you, what made you decide to run for mayor of Wallingford?
Sure. So like Ed mentioned, my family's called Wallingford home for a very long time. And so I've always kind of had at the back of my mind in terms of seeking elected office here for a long time. And then I think what finally kind of made me want to do it now was partially my experience at the Department of Justice in DC. I mostly worked in the antitrust criminal section, doing white collar crime. Most of the stuff I worked on were relating to drug companies, artificially, inflating the price of an important drug by like 2,000% and stuff like that. And you've read those stories in the news. Mm-hmm. But what really made me seek elected office, I should say, was one of the last things I did while I was at the Department of Justice was I was detailed to work directly for the Attorney General, which was Attorney General Barr at the time. And we didn't get along super well, but it was still a very good learning experience. And what it showed me was, look, I was getting about as far as I could as an entry-level federal employee without choosing a specific career track, whether it be FBI or attorney or whatever. And yet, you as a career employee in this day and age, you're very limited in the federal government in terms of your ability to actually improve things. I mean, that mission that I was on with the Attorney General, there was 30 people on this mission, and only 3 of us, myself and 2 FBI agents, were career. and the other 27 were political appointees. So essentially, folks that aren't necessarily qualified or, experienced in the position, but more concerningly, not necessarily there for the right reasons. And I think both political parties are guilty of this, but it made me realize I could do a lot more to help people and help not just my town, but anywhere by seeking elected office myself and helping things along.
What do you think is the biggest issue facing Wallingford right now?
Sure, I guess this might specify, there was one statistic in particular that I saw that made me want to run now as opposed to waiting another 2, 4, whatever years. And that's the most recent census data. So this past decade was the first time Wallingford ever had a population decline, which we knew we were heading towards, but it was probably steeper than I think any of us were expecting. And the part of it that really concerned me was the youth population. So the metric they used is age 25 and under, which I take a little bit issue with being considered a youth myself then, but no, I mean, it's really a metric for young families, right? How many young families live in this town? And over the past 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, we saw a 15% decrease in that population in just 10 years,
Wow.
15%, which again, we don't have to be theoretical here. We know what that leads to because we've seen it happen in other countries across the world and other towns across this country. And unless it's addressed and, stopped, and if not fully reversed, that's the beginning of a death spiral for any community, both in a lot of ways, economically, sure, but also just in terms of having, that age group is literally speaking our future. So if we're not doing things to attract young families back to Wallingford, which Wallingford used to be an extremely attractive place to raise a family, I'm concerned about where our town will be in 5, 10, 20 years if we don't address that.
Edward?
Tom, yeah, that kind of segues into my next question, Riley. You, in doing research on this, I read that you have referred to this upcoming election as a referendum on Wallingford's future. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it basically, yes, fits into that same statistic that I was sharing before. I mean, from day one, before we even, formally announced our campaign, we knew, or I knew what the slogan was going to be. It was for our future, because that's really the focus. And I think the biggest contrast between me and Mayor Dickinson, the current mayor, is what is the horizon we're basically working with, right? I mean, I want, presumably this will be my town, for my home for a very, very long time yet to come. And I want to make sure that this town is on, not just great, but on the right track 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, about having a long-term strategic plan, where the current mayor has admitted himself that, for a long time, we've really gone month to month in terms of planning. I think, with a little bit more foresight and a lot more, looking to, maximizing the potential of this town in the long term, that can help a lot, because I know it's cliche to say, but that young demographic that we're losing is not just the future of this town, but the future of this country. And they're no longer sticking around in Wallingford.
So true.
Again, we're talking with Riley O'Connell, Democratic candidate for mayor, town of Wallingford. I wanted to ask, you went to Pond Hill School in Dag Hammarskjöld, as we mentioned before, but in high school you chose Choate over Lyman Hall because of funding cuts in Wallingford's education budget at the time. What exactly happened?
Well, yeah, and it was a little more than that, but that was a good reason for it. I mean, it's funny, my grandfather and my mother, I still don't think have fully forgiven me for breaking the tradition of Lyman Hall. My grandfather went to Lyman Hall, it was still the town hall building. And he actually designed the current logo that they've had for many years, the Trojan logo, way back when he was still in high school. He was an artist, but which I have zero of that artistic talent whatsoever. But anyway, no, I mean, my family, we never sent anyone to private school, let alone boarding school. So I kind of just took a shot at it and see what would happen. Got very fortunate in terms of getting in and getting a little bit of help to go through. But it coincided with, I think I was really worried about going to Choate, because here all my friends were going from Dag to Lyman Hall. Lyman Hall was, again, all that I knew. And it wasn't like I was looking at other private schools. It was just Choate or Lyman Hall where I already did my classes for Lyman Hall. I was signed up to do VOAG and everything else. And this was right around when the recession happened. So 2008, 2009. And Wallingford government made it wasn't even the Board of Ed, it's the town council and mayor that makes the decision in terms of how much funding the Board of Ed gets. But, town leadership made a conscious decision to put most of the weight of that recession on our public schools. So that's where most of the cuts were made. And so within that set amount of time, we cut a lot of AP, the vast majority of AP classes, many honors classes, and even things that I think are still with us today that we don't think about as much. I mean, look at pay to play. We're one of only two school districts in the entire state that still has pay to play, which essentially means if you're a student in high school and you want to play a sport, you have to pay $100. And, I reflect on, and look, I was very fortunate. My family could have definitely, swallowed that cost without a big issue, and I could have done sports. But I think about how, one of the reasons I went to Bowdoin College up in Maine was because I was recruited for running. I was a cross country and track runner. Now, DAG, when I was in middle school, had a very good, one of the best cross country teams in the state. All those same students going, almost all going to Lyman Hall. Well, Lyman Hall could barely field a team my freshman and sophomore year, even though they had all these kids, because cross country was a sport that was especially attractive to kids who didn't have a lot of money. I mean, you could borrow someone's shoes and call it a day. You didn't need to buy a bunch of equipment or anything like that. And now all of a sudden you put $100 price tag. And so even though I could afford it and could have run, I'm not going to get recruited when I can't even, there's no team to run on. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I mean, they could barely. So it hurts everybody. And whenever you know what they say, like a rising tide lifts all boats. And this was a lowering tide that was sinking all boats. And we're still experiencing that today. We still have pay to play. And I'm a strong believer, and it's not just sports, to be clear, it's all extracurriculars, student government, band, art, whatever, clubs. Whenever you limit a student, especially a high school student where confidence, they're still building in that crucial stage of life. When you're limiting things in which they can participate in that they either just love doing or that they're very good at doing, that sort of confidence building and character building carries over into the classroom. And so there's a lot of ways in which those aspects have been struggling.
And a lot of athletes did the same thing. I remember reading. A lot of your fellow cross country runners went to Choate instead of Lyman Hall. A lot of athletes.
Yeah. Well, and Choate is a great resource to the town. It surely is. But when you have, so look at our schools now. They're 38 years ago when the current mayor took office, we were, I think, 4th or 5th best school district ranking wise in the state. And now we're dead last or close to dead last for like 6 or 7 years in a row for our division. I think 19 out of 19 or 19 out of 20. And part of that's because like all those cuts I was talking about before. And another part of that is when you have those cuts and when the public schools suffer, they almost suffer more in Wallingford because you have this alternative option for students that either can afford it or get a scholarship at Choate. So, I look at cross country, we had an undefeated team my senior year, the first undefeated team, I think, in like 20 something years at Choate. And you look at that starting 7 varsity guys, I think 4 of us were from the east side of Wallingford.
Really?
You look at the women's basketball program, and Choate had a phenomenal women's basketball program. I want to say somewhere around 5 or 6 of the, lineup of 11 on the varsity team weren't just from Wallingford, but were also from the east side of Wallingford. These are all folks who would have gone to Lyman Hall. And keep in mind, that was the same year that Lyman Hall made a run all the way to the, I think, quarterfinals of the state or semifinals of the state. So, and look, I don't care if Sheehan or Lyman Hall are winning a lot of trophies or anything else. I think it's, that's not what high school sports are about. But they're, those differences are easier to see on the court or on the running course, whatever. But keep in mind, those same things carry into the classroom. So these are students who are in a lot of ways overachieving that help drive the rest of their class forward, that were kind of sucking out of the Wallingford public school system and sending them elsewhere because we weren't competing as an education program at that time. And frankly, have still continued to slip, which I think, not to get too far ahead of myself, but I think that's the biggest factor in terms of why we see that 15% decline over the past 10 years. Because Connecticut is an expensive state to live in. There's no getting around that. But we made up, one of the things we offered is we have one of the best, on average, public educations in the state. or sorry, in the country as a state. And so when Wallingford lost that, well, we lost our number one drive for getting people to move here. So I realize that's a long, winded way of answering the question, but
Well, while we're on the subject of schools, what is the biggest problem facing Wallingford schools right now?
well, I think it's that general rank, I mean, it's almost like a really bad positive feedback loop, right? Where we're having trouble, our graduation class sizes are getting smaller and smaller because there's fewer young people in this town. And kind of as a result of that, I think that affects, there's fewer people participating in sports, fewer people getting involved in the extracurriculars in their schools and everything else. The school ranks drop. And then when the school rank drops, there's fewer young people, young families moving here. And it's almost kind of like I said, a positive feedback loop where we really got to break out of it, or we're not going to get anywhere. I think the biggest problem with the schools right now is the physical buildings themselves, right? And that's a big discussion right now across the town. And ultimately, I don't want to, get too involved with it because it is a Board of Ed decision as opposed to a mayoral decision.
And actually, that you're
That's the
segueing
next
right
question. Next
to
question,
my
yeah.
There we
next
go.
question, because I know it's everybody's talking about it. And again, we're talking with Riley O'Connell, a Democratic candidate for mayor of Wallingford. The talk of closing either Sheehan or Lyman Hall. I know it is a Board of Education decision, but do you have any of your own personal thoughts on it?
Yeah, I certainly do. I mean, I early on had pretty serious concerns and still do have concerns about properly implementing a one high school. Not the least of which were all the extracurriculars. There's fewer spots for those, like we talked about previously in terms of their importance. On top of that, busing, I think it's been pretty difficult to figure out to get people. We forget how big of a town geographically Wallingford is. So getting folks from one side of town to the other is not necessarily easy by, public transportation system. But more, after talking with the Board of Ed and a lot of other folks, if it's done correctly, there's no doubt that it could be a huge benefit to not just the schools in town and the students, but Wallingford as a whole. What I don't want to see happen is what's essentially currently happening, in that because it's such a hot button issue, really controversial issue in town, because half the town really feels strongly about one school, half the town really feels strongly about keeping two schools, and there's really very little middle ground. Both sides are extremely passionate. And as a result, the Board of Ed, from and this is just my own personal opinion, doesn't want to touch this issue. And what we can't have, like I said, one school can work, as can renovating two schools, but we currently have continued languishing of these two school buildings that are literally falling apart. I mean, look at the start of Lyman Hall school year. My cousin's a freshman at Lyman Hall, so here he is coming out of a year of virtual learning, so it's his first time back in person. First week of high school, which is a big jump as well.
Yep.
And then you go to Lyman Hall. First day was a half day because they closed early for heat, because we don't have air conditioning, unlike most schools in the state at this point that have air conditioning. Second day, early dismissal because of heat again. Third day, completely closed because the school flooded. Because like I said, it's one of the oldest school buildings in the state, and it was built on a swamp. So it's not surprising that our students aren't meeting the academic requirements of the state, and our school rank is falling because we can't even give them a consistent environment to learn in. And so I think, again, I can see arguments perfectly being made for one or two schools, but I want a decision to be made pronto, because what currently happens is we pay all this money for a study. Study takes a year to complete. By the time it's done, well, now we're back in an election year, and no one on the Board of Ed wants to vote on it. And so then it goes, and by the time, then we have to do another study because the first one expired, and it's just this endless cycle that's not getting us anywhere. So that's something that I'm going to strongly push, that a decision gets made ASAP, because our schools really can't drop any lower in terms of rank. And I think the buildings.
And I think it is such an. Oh, I'm sorry, Riley. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's such an emotional issue. I know I said, Thanksgiving weekend will never be the same between the Samaha Powder Puff Bowl and then the Sheehan Lyman Hall Carini Bowl game. That's a lot of people want to hold on to that because of
They
tradition.
love that rivalry. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And Powder Puff always has been one of my favorite, events of the year for the town, mainly because I'm on the east side and Lyman Hall tends to win. I'm less of a fan of the game. I don't tend to win that one. But no, we can keep a lot of those traditions.
They get huge
going.
crowds.
Yeah. We can keep a lot of those traditions going in some capacity, even with one school. One of the arguments that I've heard that I just want to shoot down now, because I think it's the most ridiculous one, is, oh, think about how good Sheehan sports teams are and how good Lyman Hall sports teams are. If we combine them, we'd win every trophy. First of all, we'd lose almost every game in every sport for our first 3 seasons, because we'd be in an entirely different division. We'd be facing other big schools. And two, sports are so important to me. And I think for students to have, but they're important because they build character and there's something that's an outlet for students. I couldn't care less how many trophies win, nor should parents, frankly. Students should want to win trophies, and that's part of the character building, right? They should aspire to be as good as they can at whatever, hobby they're trying to do. But they don't need extra motivation from the rest of us. So anyway, I don't think the idea of us winning more trophies, one, is untrue, and two, even if it were true, I don't think it's a good reason to keep the 2 schools. But anyway.
So this ought to be interesting to see how this plays out in the future.
Definitely.
Good topic to follow.
Yeah.
In your younger years, you worked as a lifeguard at community pool. What are your views on the future of the community pool?
Well, I'm glad that you said my younger years, because usually when I show up at people's doors, they say, "Who's this 16-year-old kid at my door?" So I have to tell them I'm 25. But no, it's I learned how to swim at community pool. My mom would take me and my brothers there all the time, every summer. It was, I don't think it was my first job in high school, but it was my second or third. And it was the best job in town to have, because it paid like 50 cents above minimum wage. So it was better than the other town jobs you get as a high schooler. And you got to be outside all day in the summer. So it was a nice gig for sure. The pools from day one was always a big part of my campaign. It feeds into here's this thing that is super attractive also for young families to come in. And I don't think it's a coincidence when you shut down community pool and then look at even the private entities, private businesses that catered to young families disappearing almost at the exact same time. Sky Zone, the trampoline park, the bowling alley on that side of town. We lost a lot. And now you look around, if you have young kids, and there's really not too many things to bring them to. When that pool was first built in 53, I think it was the biggest pool in the country, which I always forget. I mean, I think people forget. Yeah, I've seen claims it was the biggest pool in the world. I don't think there's any way of proving that, but it was certainly the biggest outdoor pool of its type in the country. And as a result, not just the pool. I mean, the pool is symbolic of a town that invested a lot in public assets and parks that were, like I said, valuable to families. But in the 10 years since that pool was built in 53 to 63, Wallingford's population went up 108% in 10 years. And our economic output went up over 200%. And to put in perspective, Connecticut, because you're tail end of the baby boomers, maybe that's what you can chalk it up to. But if you look at Connecticut's population only went up like 16% over that decade. So it really was a specific phenomenon to Wallingford. And that was our golden age. That's when most of our industries came into being. That's when the town as we know it went from 15,000 to 30,000 people and really came into its own. So we're not going to have that kind of, the pool paid for itself in the first 6 months, essentially. And we're not going to have that kind of response, to a pool now, to fixing and everything else, but it's so important to do something with it, as opposed to just letting it sit there as a mosquito zoo. Like it's
Agreed.
So absolutely it would be my priority to have that back out to bid within the first few months of taking office. And I can't guarantee that it would be as nice as a proposal as the most recent one, because that was 2 years ago. We got this beautiful proposal for like $6.5 million. But that was when labor costs were much cheaper and when material costs were a lot cheaper. So, if we were to do that project today, it'd probably be closer to 12, 13 million. But there's still a lot we can do and grants we can apply for. And those, we need some kind of pool there. And I think it's a really important value to this community.
Absolutely. Ed?
Again, we're talking with Riley O'Connell, Democratic candidate for mayor, town of Wallingford. This isn't an issue question, but it's more a philosophical question that I had here when I was when Tom and I were thinking questions for this. You're facing someone who was in office for 13 years before you were born. Does it seem like, he's been mayor forever. Does it seem like a David and Goliath contest to you? Do you sometimes feel like you're getting in the ring against Mike Tyson? I mean, you're talking against, Mayor Dickinson, who's been mayor since 1983. It's, it's like the Tiger Woods. Do you feel like you're going in the ring with a legend, with an unbeatable opponent who's beaten everybody since 1983? It just a philosophical question.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I mean, I would compare it less to David and Goliath, or I like the boxing example. It's kind of like I see myself as an up and coming boxer who's doing well, but maybe he's only had a few matches, going against, sure, Mike Tyson, but Mike Tyson's when he's 65 years old. It's not the same Mayor Dickinson that was, there 20 years ago.
That's his prime, Mike Tyson.
Yeah, sorry, 20 years past his prime, Mike Tyson. I was about to use a different example, but I realized I was going to like Tom Brady or something. But Tom Brady might actually still be a very good player.
Yes.
So, probably not my best analogy. But no, I mean, it's Mayor Dickinson is, I think, the 4th or 5th longest serving mayor in the entire country. Like you said, he's been there for, he's going for 4 decades with this election. He's hasn't lost 19 elections in a row. So there's nothing we can take for granted. I mean, we can't underestimate him by any means. That being said, I think it's just all the more evidence why it's so important to win this election and move forward. I mean, I've always had reasonable disagreements with the mayor and continue to, but those disagreements have become more and louder over the past 15, 20 years, because no one, in my opinion, should be in any office for any job for that matter, specifically for that amount of time, but especially an elected office, because it comes with complacency, it comes with a lack of new perspective. And I've already told people from the start that you don't have to worry about me being a Dickinson 2.0, because I'm in favor of term limits. And even though I don't think Wallingford would pass those, I personally refuse to be in this office for more than 8 to 10 years. And the only reason I even say 8 to 10 years is because there's a lot that has to get done. And I'm not naive that it's going to be possible or even smart to do it overnight. It's going to take a long time to slowly, gradually work our way to where we need to be. But after 8 to 10 years, then someone else should take the reins and with new perspective and see what they can do to keep the town moving forward. The big difference, the big clarification I want to make for folks is, yes, Mayor Dickinson's won 19 elections in a row, but Wallingford voter turnout has been so that you can win an election here with 16% approval rating. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing the job all that or as well as you can be. So Wallingford is such a politically bizarre, unique town, for better or worse. And that last year we had 88% voter turnout for the presidential election, which is phenomenal. I mean, that's what a healthy democracy should be having in terms of a turnout. It was, I believe it was either the highest in the state or the second highest. For local elections, we're on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. We usually hover around 30%, which is not, representative of the healthiest democracy. And we have enough polling this year to show that or enough data, not so much polling, that if we can get a voter turnout or the same people to vote as voted last year to vote this year, I win 2-1 almost. But obviously that's not going to be the case. But if we can even get to 40% turnout, that'll be a huge, step forward for Wallingford. So that's really what we're aiming for. It's a combination of, if there were ever a year to win, it's this one, to beat Mayor Dickinson. But at the same time, you're right. You can't take a guy who's won 38 years of elections. You can't underestimate him.
Absolutely not. Ed, I think you would know the answer to this. I believe Prospect is still number 1 for the mayor who's been in the longest. Am I correct?
Yeah, the Prospect mayor, Robert, I forget his last name, but yeah, he actually has the record for the state of Connecticut.
He has the record for the country too, I believe. I think he's
40. Oh, does he really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that's what I always found funny is Mayor Dickinson's at 4th or 5th in the country, but he's still only 2nd in Connecticut in terms of longest serving.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was wondering if you had a chance to talk to Ben Florsheim over in Middletown. He's got 2 years on you. He's 27. And
yes, no,
he did it.
I've spoken very closely with Ben Florsheim over the course of this campaign, and I even stole one of his staff members early on to help him. But I keep pointing to people, people always have a concern with, and it doesn't help that I look even younger than I am, but folks will have a concern. Well, what does this, I'll quote them, what does this kid know about, how to manage a $180 million budget? And the answer I give is, well, I have just as much, if not more experience than Mayor Dickinson when he first took office 38 years ago. But the bigger point is I point, doesn't matter what party you are, I point to the mayor of New Britain, who was younger than me when she was elected, who was a Republican. Yep, who was a Republican. And then I point to Ben Florsheim, who was about my age when he was elected a year ago, and who's both of whom have done a great job. And so there's just, I think, a real benefit that we've seen, proven benefit to having kind of the next generation of leadership take a bigger role in terms of shaping what the town is going to look like.
Now,
And if memory, I was going to say, if memory serves, I think Florsheim originally was a student at Wesleyan.
I believe that's the case. Yeah.
Now you received the endorsement from the Democratic Town Committee. You wanna tell us how that felt when you received that endorsement and what that was like?
Well, it's to this day the greatest honor I've ever received was to get that endorsement. Hopefully second to an honor that I'm hoping to get in 30 days. But no, it wasn't an easy process, because you got to keep in mind, even though my family's been here for 5 generations, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure I'm the first Democrat in the family. So it's a lifelong Republican family. And now for local politics, frankly, it shouldn't matter. I mean, it's not like Wallingford government decisions fall cleanly into one political party or the other, nor should they. But so I think proving myself in that regard, having not known anyone in the Democratic Town Committee, on top of that, I'm not a member of the Democratic Town Committee, even though I'm a lifelong Democrat. I was never a party politics person, right? I think I wouldn't trade growing up in a Republican family for anything, because having that perspective taught me very early on, to vote for people based on their competency, their ability to do the job, and their character, right? Regardless of whether there was necessarily a D or an R in front of their name on the ballot. Mm-hmm. So that was a great learning experience, but trying to build myself up within Wallingford Democratic politics took time, because not many people knew me within the party, I should say. And, I had to still stay true to myself, saying, look, I'm not a party line guy all the time. I'm, even though I'm always been a Democrat, I've always just, the distinction I'll make, and then I'll stop rambling, is that I've always considered myself a government guy, a government service guy, hence my time at the DOJ and everything else, as opposed to a political guy. And I know in this modern age, the two kind of can unfortunately overlap greatly. But I think they are different, because at the end of the day, you're running to be a mayor of, town of 44,000 people, not a mayor of 8,000 Democrats.
Yeah.
And that's how our campaign's been run from the start. And I just wanted to add too, that while that process was I don't want to say difficult, makes it sound negative. It was difficult in a good way. It was challenging. And we had some other great candidates running for mayor at the time, before the caucus and everything else. But I got to say, in terms of the slate of candidates we have across the board for town council and the Board of Ed, it's that I'll even up that as my top honor, not so much getting the endorsement, but getting to run alongside that group, because it's a truly phenomenal group. And I think certainly the strongest group of candidates we've ever put forth.
It
Riley O'Connell.
It looks like
Democratic candidate.
No, go ahead, Tom. It looks like a good group of candidates. I've seen a lot of signs around.
No, I'm very proud to be running alongside them.
You had mentioned, Riley, it's you're 30 days out. To use a runner's analogy, you can see the finish line. The finish line is in sight. Tell us now, what's a typical day like for Riley O'Connell now? Now that you've gone over Heartbreak Hill, you can see the Citgo sign, you can see the finish line. Tell me a typical day for you right now.
I like the analogy. Honestly, my typical day hasn't changed that much in the past 7 months, only that it's obviously intensity has increased. The biggest difference now is that when I show up at people's doors, they know who I am. versus 6 months ago, most people didn't know there was an election this year. So that's the real difference. But no, my normal day to day is I spend the mornings in meetings and, answering emails and messages and everything else. And I have got to keep in mind, my phone number and email address are plastered all over this town at this point. So I probably get about 20, potential constituent or voter calls a day, which is great. I love that people can reach me, but that's, I spend a lot of my time doing that. Most of my day, usually between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. is spent going door to door. So just door after door after door and just talking to as many folks as I can, because like I said, I totally understand the hesitation. If you just hear 25-year-old guy running for mayor, what does he know? The only way I can show people that I know what I'm talking about is to have a conversation with them. And more importantly, the only way I can know what's important to folks and what issues in particular neighborhoods need to be addressed is also by going door to door. So I've been keeping a running list of issues anywhere specific to this tree. 3 tree branches need to be cut down because they're blocking my view of the road here, to this part of town floods every single time it rains, that I've just gotten from going constituent doors. And I think it's about 160 items now. So the list is growing pretty quickly.
Wow.
But so going around, if anyone ever sees me, you'll probably see me on my bike, biking around town. I've learned, not soon enough, but early enough, at some point in the campaign, that saves my legs a lot of miles if I drive my bike drive my car with my bike on it to the neighborhood that I'm knocking for the day, as opposed to just driving my car and then walking the whole way. Plus I could talk to a lot more people faster.
I've seen you quite a bit the last couple of weeks.
That's right. I know I've seen Tom at a bunch of events lately, which is where, if I'm not door knocking, I'm at events. So whether it's the Holy Trinity Carnival, or I think I saw Tom at our church's picnic, and just a bunch of stuff, which are in the fish buying race, and frankly, the events I love, because I get to do things that I love to do, whether it's running or eating fried dough, and still get out there in the community and talk to as many people as possible. So tomorrow I'll be at Celebrate Wallingford.
Yeah, and you have an event, I think, this Sunday, a community cookout at Community Lake coming up.
Yeah,
this Sunday?
so it's not my event. It's the DTC is putting on an event that I'll be at and participating in. Me and
Democratic Town Committee.
Yes, the Democratic Town Committee. Thank you for clarifying. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It sounds very much like the old community day or family days we used to have at Community Lake, and it'll kind of be a tail end, because obviously Celebrate Wallingford, given the short time that they've had to put it together this year. I think I'm looking forward to it. I think they did a great job with the time they had, but it's only a one-day event this year. So this will be a nice kind of Sunday event to keep the fun activities going, very family oriented. And myself and all the other Democratic candidates will be there just to informally chat with folks. I'll be there with my dog. So I think people will be more excited to see him than me. But
what's the time on that?
3 p.m. at Community Lake, I believe.
Okay, I might try to swing down Sunday.
Yeah, it's if anyone's curious about, look, I'm all over town and at every event possible at this point. So a lot of people have already had to sit through me talking at them and boring them. But if you haven't talked to our town council candidates or board of ed candidates, now is that probably the best event to do so. That, and I think a lot of them will be around at Celebrate Wallingford tomorrow too, but good time to meet them.
We're talking with Riley O'Connell, Democratic candidate for Mayor of Wallingford. You mentioned people coming to see your dog.
That leads into the next question, which is very important to me.
Yeah.
Which is,
well, go ahead, Tommy. You can.
The condition of
the
condition of the animal shelter in town this past summer, it got quite a bit of press, both locally and statewide. How did you get involved with that?
Sure. That's been a long fight and it's still ongoing. But yeah, so I've always been a big animal person. People joked in middle school that I had the nickname Nature Boy, because I was just constantly being out in the woods with a squirrel or a snake or something. And my own dog, Brunswick, is a rescue dog. And to put in perspective how big of an issue this has been, and my dog, playing a role in it, is for my first time ever, I was knocking on a door earlier this week to introduce myself to a family, and someone answered the door and they said, "Oh, you're that man running for mayor." She couldn't remember my name, but she said, "Oh, your dog is Brunswick." So I came across my first voter who didn't know who I was, but knew who my dog was, which is great. I'm glad I'm just glad my dog's not running for mayor because I don't think I could beat him in a vote. But no, it's basically I don't, I think probably most of your viewers are familiar with the general situation at the animal shelter. There was an argument over AC being installed. There was a memo from 2018 from the previous animal control officer, so head of the department, really frankly begging for AC and then citing the mayor's inaction on that as one of the reasons she left. The way I got involved was, folks had, like a lot of things in town, folks had reached out to me saying, hey, are you aware of this issue? And I wasn't, frankly, at the time. This was early in the summer before we really had these major heat waves, or leading into the heat waves, the first heat waves. And so I went down to the animal shelter, checked it out. It was, really dangerously hot. The one AC unit that they did have for the front area had also broken. So it was just a really difficult situation. And we weren't really sure what was going on. And the town council meeting, the mayor had said he had not, was not aware of the problem. So I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request, not expecting to get much out of it. And normally when that kind of stuff happens, from my experience at the DOJ, people will drag their feet as much as possible to kind of like delay the information getting out. But we got the information almost immediately. And I was like, that's strange. And I figured out why. It was because the information was pretty damning. It was that memo I was talking about saying we really need it. And so I think the idea was by sending it out all at once, it'd be one news story as opposed to continuing out throughout the summer. But here we are. And, I think we just tallied yesterday, we're at 1,000, 1,600 something days since that request was made. And it's still not quite there. But thanks to and look, I can only take very little credit for where we are now. The animal activists, not just from Wallingford, I mean, certainly many from Wallingford, but across the state have stepped up so huge, and they're still coming to town council meetings every week, every 2 weeks, whenever we have one, and making sure the issues eventually addressed. I mean, the fact that the silver lining to this whole situation, which is, like I said, still ongoing, was I've never been more inspired by the town of Wallingford, truly, because you had people from, all different political affiliations, all ages, all walks of life. When they heard about the animal shelter, they were, every couple minutes, someone was walking in with a fan or food or ice or dog ice cream or whatever to just donate everything they had to make the situation there as comfortable as possible, which was amazing.
I know.
I know, and there are lawn signs for the
so
we speak for the animals. I see all those lawn signs.
Exactly. Yeah. And that wasn't, again, that's what I'm saying. That wasn't me. That was a group of incredibly dedicated volunteers at the animal shelter coming together and just making sure that people were aware of this issue. Because that's the only reason we even are where we are today, where it's still getting talked about and hopefully getting addressed soon, is because people didn't give up and they still won't give up. And there's the thing about animal lovers is they are passionate and dedicated and will not give up.
Well, I know I happened to be at the meeting on the 14th of September. And I know there was a woman there from, I don't remember, it was an animal group somewhere up in the upper part of the state. And she was very elegant when she spoke.
Yes.
I know she was very, close to this issue. And now the mayor said that night that he put it out to bid for the air conditioning. Why would he have to put it out to bid when they had this money left to the shelter?
So they would still have to put it out to bid in terms of having someone do the project, assuming that they don't think it's within the range of Public Works, which could be argued that that Public Works should do it themselves. Because even if they have the money, they have to put it out to bid for someone to do the project. What I want to keep stressing with folks, though, is that while putting out to bid is an important step, and it's a great step that we've kind of forced, it's by no means said and done. I mean, community pool is also put out to bid, and we still don't have any new community pool. A position for treasurer was put out to bid, is not the right word, but put out for interviews and applications. We haven't had a treasurer in 4 years.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up next. That was another thing I was surprised at, all these department heads that are vacant now.
Right. So putting out the bid's great, but we're not over the line yet.
Hopefully they get this situation rectified soon. I mean,
absolutely.
Those poor animals.
We're speaking with Riley O'Connell, Democratic candidate for mayor of Wallingford. Riley, you recently spoke at the Wallingford Senior Center in Ashlar Village not too long ago. What issues were important to them during your time there?
Yeah, so Wallingford's got an older population on average than the rest of the state. So these are extremely important members of our community, whose issues are very different from the rest of the town. Even just Ashlar Village or Masonic here compared to the senior center, totally different sets of issues between those two groups. So the main thing I want, that we talked about was, a lot of these folks are the mayor's base. These are people who voted for the mayor for, 38 years so far. And it's not going to necessarily be easy to convince them, hey, you might want to support me this time. But I had a great time there because the main thing we talked about was, look, we owe it to this group of folks, this generation of folks, for Wallingford being the town it is today. All the things that are foundationally so great about Wallingford, no mayor or government person could have done. It's all cultural. So the fact that we're a community that cares about each other, neighbors care about other neighbors, or a community that values education, values hard work, just a strong sense of place, right? This is a town where the residents actually care about the town as a whole, which I really don't think you can say about most towns. And so I was trying to explain to folks was, look, and it's a weird promise to run on, but especially for the Ashlar Village folks, I said, look, your lives aren't going to change one bit by electing me. It's going to be exactly the same, which is, weird to promise a status quo, but that's essentially the case. The reason I still deeply am asking for their support is because they worked so hard to create the town that we have now. Maybe they raised their kids here, their grandkids here. And the reason that a lot of people work hard is that they can pass on a country, or in this case, a town, in better condition than they found it, that they were in the condition that they were born into it. And frankly, we need new leadership if we're going to stop the current decline and put it back on an upward trajectory like it was for so long. Now, for the senior center, it's a bit different because, well, ultimately, yes, what I'm suggesting will impact their lives much less than young people and young families. There is one significant way in which my platform would impact them, and that's taxes. So I've already promised to, one of my priorities is to freeze the tax rate actually over the next couple of years, mainly because we've had one of the fastest growing tax rates in Connecticut, and certainly the fastest in this part of Connecticut. And every year that we've had an increase, we've also had an increase in the size of the savings accounts, which is by definition overtaxing. You can combine those two things essentially and freeze the mill rate successfully. But even more specifically, and this is what I've been talking to a lot of the town councilors on, and hopefully this will be discussed at a town council meeting coming up soon, is this proposal to freeze the tax rate entirely, or not the tax rate, the raw tax amount paid for senior citizens in Wallingford. So a lot of other towns across the state have done this to huge success. And basically what it means is, if you're a senior citizen, it's like my grandparents, were long retired, long been on a fixed income, but still own their own house in Wallingford. It's becoming increasingly difficult to keep a house in this town when you're on a fixed income for that long, because the taxes go up. And even if taxes don't go up, you have a reevaluation, and all of a sudden you pay a lot more in property tax anyway, because your property value went up. So what I'm suggesting here is, and so far it seems to have the support of the town council, is we freeze the raw amount of taxes that folks pay if they're a senior citizen. And the way that it doesn't cost the taxpayer any money is when they eventually move or sell the house or whatever the differential was between when that freeze was implemented and where they are now, and whatever amount of money they didn't pay that a non-senior citizen would have paid, which in retrospect, even if it's 15 years, is only going to be a couple $1,000s max, which is a lot of money if you're a senior citizen on a fixed income. But when you're talking about a mortgage, which is what this differential is going to be factored in, or shoveled into, is whoever takes up the following mortgage, it's relatively insignificant. I mean, $2,000 on a $400,000 mortgage is not a lot. So hopefully we can do that, because we're seeing, I'm focused on the fact that we have a huge population of declining young people, but no one should have to leave this community and, move to Florida because they can't afford to live in the hometown that they grew up in, that their parents grew up in, and their parents grew up in. So hopefully that can help address it. But ultimately, like I said, it's not my, administration as mayor is not going to fundamentally change the lives of senior citizens in this community. But it will fundamentally change the lives of all those that come after. And I think because this is a community that cares so much about this town and everyone else in it, I think the seniors have overwhelmingly got behind that. And that's why it's such a great reception at the senior center and Astor Village, and why it was so fun to go there.
Ed?
What, we talked a little bit about the budget. How would your budget be different from Mayor Dickinson's budget? I know you
Well,
mentioned something about direct deposit for town employees, one of the things, but how would the budget be different in your administration?
yeah, so something like direct deposit wouldn't really affect the budget because it would be such a small cost to implement, and then would pay for itself within the first year, less than the first year. The way the budget would really change would be the surplus versus deficits that we have. So overall, we have on average, a pretty substantial surplus every year. And that's because the mayor consistently, and he does this intentionally, he said as much, overestimates expenditures and underestimates revenue. So when you basically create at the end of most years about a $2 million surplus or something along those lines. And by having that, you have the surplus that's after budget season. It's at the end of the year, the fiscal year. So it just kind of, the mayor really has close to complete autonomy on what to do with it. And he likes to have that money to then further go into the savings accounts, which is why, in my opinion, the savings accounts we have are pretty bloated because they're artificially inflated in a lot of ways. So my goal would be to more closely estimate what those revenues and expenditures are, so that that surplus is closer to zero, right? It's closer to a net, balance of the budget. And as a result, that money doesn't just disappear. But what happens is it means the town, it's part of our, general fund already at the beginning of the year. So the town council has much more of a say in terms of where we put this money in. Because by continuing to increase the savings accounts while we have savings accounts, while we have so many critical infrastructure projects in town that are so delayed. We're decades behind with the physical infrastructure. We already talked about the schools. We didn't even talk about the roads, town hall itself. I mean, there's buckets all over the third floor from leaking ceiling that's been leaking for years.
Sidewalks.
Yeah, sidewalks. Yes, definitely sidewalks. And then that's physical infrastructure. Technological infrastructure, we're not decades behind, we're generations behind. So that's when you're talking about stuff like direct deposit, online bill pay. The biggest one, frankly, being online marketing, which doesn't cost a whole lot, but would completely revolutionize our economic development. I mean, we've been declining in economic development and economic revenue for decades, or about 2 decades, really, as a town. And Wallingford once was, understandably, the economic epicenter of the suburbs of Connecticut. We have the most affordable energy because of our own electric division. We've got 2 highways. We've got perfect location between New Haven and Hartford. We've got vibrant community. We've got all these things going for us. But it doesn't matter if you're a small business or a big business, the only place you look in terms of where would be best for you to set up a shop or an outpost or headquarters or whatever is the internet. And we're just not competing. We're not putting ourselves to the table to take advantage of the fact that we should and are the most desirable place to do business in Connecticut for a suburb. But we're just not, other companies don't know we exist. So that's one thing we can work on.
What would the first few months on the job be like for Riley O'Connell?
Well, it would really be mostly focused on, large part of it's gonna be hiring. I mean, not to undersell my own value as someone who wants to be mayor. 95% of the job of mayor is surrounding yourself with people who can do a good job and are experts in their fields, and that you can rely on. So making sure we have a lot of folks there's a lot of folks that have worked with the mayor for 38 years. And while we'd love to keep a bunch of them on if they would like to for that institutional knowledge, it's easy to expect that there'll probably be a high turnover. So filling positions quickly is going to be the first goal. Beyond that, focusing as early as possible on those investments, those renovations that'll have a high rate or fast return on investment. So Ed mentioned direct deposit. Direct deposit for town employees, by not having it, it currently costs us, my campaign estimates, tens of thousands of dollars a year, because many union contracts in town understandably have a 15-minute paid leave in their weekly schedule to go pick up their checks, which is incredibly outdated and borderline archaic.
Yeah.
So just by implementing that, one, we're doing something that the unions and town employees want in the first place. They don't want to have to go pick up their checks. So it's a quality of life improvement, but also saves us a bunch of money, and it doesn't cost a whole lot to implement. So that return investment is going to be a few months. So those are the kind of quality of life investments we're going to want to do early on, because we can do it without spending a bunch of money, right? They'll pay for themselves pretty quickly, and we want to lead with those. Same with online bill pay. That's something that costs very little to do, and it will, quality of life improvement will hopefully save folks a lot of time and money down the road. So again, those are the kind of things you want to lead with. Community pool, getting a new proposal out for that, it's going to be a huge priority. And the big thing, and this can't happen right away, but certainly my first year is going to be a big focus, is kind of getting our finances in order. So currently we have about 30 million in the general fund, but none of it's really invested. So we get really low returns on investments. Whenever we talk about this, whenever this is brought up to the mayor previously, he'll point to a year like 2009, where we had like a 0.5% increase in the fund, while most towns had a negative 10, 12% decrease, because it was the stocks crashed. But if you look on average over the past 38 years, we're still at that 0.5% increase, when most towns are around a 7 to 8% increase in the fund on an annual basis. So there's just a lot of common sense investment things. I mean, we currently don't have a comptroller. I pray to God that that's not still the case in January, because if so, I don't know how we're going to pass a budget. That would be truly terrifying. But filling positions and getting our finances in order and focusing on those early projects is going to take up probably the majority of my time for those first 100 days.
That actually shocked me at the last meeting I went to. I did not know that position was vacant. Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say on that too is that, sure, the comptroller answers to the mayor, but there's no, to be very clear, the comptroller is the single most important position in this town government, far more important than the mayor, because this is the person who's in charge of every town. I mean, we have a $180 million budget. He's in charge of that whole thing. Every financial decision the town makes goes through the comptroller, pension funds, investments, everything else. So by, not having a comptroller at the helm for 4 months now, despite knowing that we wouldn't have one 7 months ago, that he was leaving, it's concerning. And we haven't interviewed anyone yet. So again, I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole with that, but hopefully that is, like the animal shelter, something that's addressed long before I would take office in January. Now, you also mentioned that you'd like to see more of a group effort between the mayor and the town council. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah, so out of my top 3 priorities for my first term, like I said, one was freezing the mill rate temporarily, the other investing in all these infrastructure improvements, and the third one is to, and I can't do it on my own as mayor, of course, but to push for a town charter revision. We currently have the single strongest mayoral system in New England, where we have a mayor who, well, I'll use his own words, he described himself under the current charter as a benevolent dictator. And even though I Josh about his benevolence, it's true. He is given the powers of a dictator, and that's not so much to bash him, but even if it's me, I don't think, whenever you have one person who gets complete authority over an entire town, that's when mistakes are made. That's when things fall through the cracks. And we've only made it worse over the past 38 years. We've stripped power, with every charter revision, we've stripped more and more power away from the town council and given it to the mayor. And one of my favorite, well, I shouldn't say favorite, but a really interesting quote from probably about 7 or 8 months ago, when there was the investigation about the whole employee lawsuit with an employee who wanted to work from home with COVID and everything else, that the town of Wallingford lost, or we reached a bargain. And someone asked a question at a town council meeting saying, well, is the mayor's conduct being investigated by the town of Wallingford? And the mayor responded, yes. And then about 10 minutes later, someone asked a follow-up question saying, well, what department's investigating it? Oh, the mayor's office. So those are the kind of things where we no longer have the checks and balances that other towns do. I want the town council to be able to, they voted 9-0 about this animal shelter, but the mayor has full autonomy and authority to ignore them, which is what he's done so far. Mm-hmm. So I want the town council to have the ability, if they have a supermajority, to go over my head and tell a department head,
doesn't matter what the mayor says, put this thing out to bid, go do this thing, which is what other towns in the modern age, frankly, have. It's just it's counterintuitive that one of my priorities is to weaken, my own position. But it's true. It should be, why elect a town council if they don't have any power? And that's kind of where they're at now. So I'm hoping that is something that the town council should want to get behind, because it'll give them, the ability to have more of a say. And hopefully that, maybe teamwork might not be the right word, because I'm sure I'll butt heads with the town council plenty, but having multiple, cooks in the kitchen, I think, can only help.
I agree. Ed?
We're talking with Riley O'Connell, Democratic candidate for mayor, the town of Wallingford, the election about 30 days away. I wanted to ask your views, now that marijuana is legal in Connecticut, do you have a view on selling locations in Wallingford, or just a view on the legalization in general?
Yeah, so I'll preface this where I don't intend to overturn planning and zoning's recent ruling, essentially banning medicinal and recreational marijuana, only because that's not, in my interpretation of the charter, that's just not, the mayor doesn't have the authority to do that. Anyone can go to planning and zoning and have them review it and change their mind. So that's my reasoning for what role I could play as becoming mayor. But that being said, I was extremely disappointed and frustrated with how the mayor handled that situation in the first place, because at the end of the day, the planning and zoning's job is to make decisions that are based on town ordinances, based on state law, and based on whatever is in the best economic and community interest of the town. But when you have the mayor a month and a half before that decision is being made saying, under no circumstances should we, it was a press release, under no circumstances should we have this industry in our town. Well, you're politicizing something that shouldn't be a political decision. We actually had this, there was a whistleblower at the DOJ when I was there that this became an issue with, where there were several whistleblowers where, again, I worked in antitrust. I did criminal antitrust, but most of antitrust is civil. So the department investigating civil mergers. On average, any merger between a company, I think only like 3% of them are reviewed or go to a further court review by the Department of Justice, because there's just too many of them, and most of them aren't suspicious. And they looked at, under the Trump administration, they looked at the marijuana industry, and it was something like 96% of them were being under court review, even though on average it's only 3%. And it was clear that it was politically motivated. And so, they failed because these things aren't supposed to be political. And on top of that, just strictly from an economic standpoint, because we have all these studies now that show that that by having, a marijuana dealer or a marijuana store, as long as it's within 15 miles or 10 miles, I can't remember, it was somewhere around 8-10 miles, it doesn't actually affect usage in that area. It doesn't really matter if it's a half mile away or 8 miles. Well, most of our neighboring towns are legalizing, or not legalizing, allowing stores to be in their town. And on top of that, this particular industry has to pay much larger percentage of their revenues into the town as tax. So you're getting basically 8 to 10 times as much revenue from a store as a store making the same profits that's not marijuana based. So my argument was, if we have these and we have this extra revenue coming in, I'm totally in favor of if the compromise, and frankly not just a compromise, something I'm in favor of, is to give all this additional revenue straight into Coalition for Better Wallingford, so they can use that money to promote, education, promote programs. That's great, but we're gaining nothing by having these neighboring towns get all this industry to themselves, when it's not, it's going to affect the usage in our town the same in terms of our residents, but we're not getting any of these extra profits, which we could then, redirect into programs that could help people. So I wasn't a fan of the decision, but I was mostly not a fan of how it was politicized. And we'll see if planning and zoning changes. I mean, anyone can go to planning and zoning and ask them to change their mind and review it again. So we'll see what happens in the distant future.
I was glad to hear you say that about the coalition. They are a great organization. And
Fantastic organization.
I've had the opportunity to work with them in the past, and they're a great group.
They do a lot of amazing work that no government entity ever could. I mean, I've always been in favor. They do get, some funding from the town of Wallingford, but I've always been in favor of increasing that substantially if given the opportunity, because what they've been able to do in terms of decreasing overdoses in this town has been phenomenal. What they do for at-risk youth programs and after-school programs is phenomenal. And it's just a nonprofit in town that I can't speak highly enough of.
Now,
Yeah, we had him on as guest a couple of
yes,
years
we
ago.
did, and I also did a one of my fundraisers for them. My Tommy Palooza was to benefit them. One of the past years that we did. One of the other questions I had for you that was also discussed at the last town council meeting that I went to was the Wallingford Police Department having a Facebook presence. Your opinion on that? I
couldn't be more in favor of it. Frankly, I think it's kind of bizarre that it seems we need approval from the mayor for that kind of thing, because it doesn't, for the most, generally it's free. I mean, it's a Facebook page. I want to clarify, I was especially pleased with our new police chief Ventura's response saying, if we're going to, and he seems to be strongly in support of this as well, but he also said, if we're going to do it, we need a little more funding for training. And I think that's very, very wise, because I've seen, especially in Connecticut, believe it or not, plenty of towns, police departments who have their own Facebook pages misuse it like crazy. I mean, I'll see some of these posts and my DOJ red flags and like alarms will be going off in my head. It's like they'll be posting about cases that haven't even gone to court yet, and they have a whole story, assuming someone's guilt. And then when they turns out that they're innocent, well, now they sue the police department for hundreds of thousands of dollars, rightfully so, and win. So yes, training is an absolute necessity, because when you have a Facebook page for something like a police department, the incentives can, I don't think it'll happen in Wallingford, but I'm just saying the incentives can kind of get crossed a bit, where their incentive isn't to make themselves look like they're doing work. We know they're doing work, but when they post about their cases before they're settled, that's when you run into issues. What it should be used for, and what we're asking, what the chief's asking for it to be used for, is primarily for showing a lot of the a lot of the stuff they're doing in the community. So they go to the senior center once every week or two and do programs with the seniors. That's amazing, but most people don't even know about that. They do a lot of programs with the schools. They had their yearly bike rodeo where they teach kids how to safely ride a bike. And I just saw recently there was a complaint that parents had because they did the first round of the bike rodeo and all these kids qualified for the second round. And they got a letter. That's the only way they could communicate. They got a letter in the mail saying, here, the second round's on this date, but they forgot to include a location. And there was no way to tell the parents then where to go. So if we had a social media way to reach out to folks, that's a big plus. The other plus is for emergencies, right? So we had this summer of storms. We were supposed to have a really big storm. Unfortunately, ended up not being that big. But I apologize for keep mentioning my grandparents, but they don't watch a whole lot of TV. They don't go online. They would have had no idea there was a storm coming if they didn't have my folks and my brothers and me to tell them. And that's the case for a lot of, well, that's a little different because that's more of a robocalling thing. But there's a lot of ways in which I had people calling me. I'm just a candidate. I'm not an elected official yet. And I had 3 folks call me saying, well, if things get bad, this is the weekend of the storm, things get bad, where do I go for shelter? I didn't know. So I had to call the police department and talk to them and everything else. That's a way that it can be used. And then I think it was on Fairlawn Drive or Fairlawn, somewhere around that part of town. There was a potential active shooter situation earlier this year.
Yes,
that the police handled. Right. And the police handled amazingly well. Truly. I mean, I thought they did a fantastic job and we're just very heroic throughout the whole thing. But the complaint being when the body cam footage came out of that is kids were playing just down the road, in the stakeout that went on for a couple hours. And there's nothing the police could have done that were there on the scene. They were doing their jobs to, control that area. But if they had a Facebook page, they can just say, and it doesn't have to be specific, nor should it be, but it's to say, hey, there's a situation in this area at this time. Please go inside until you're given the green light. That could go a long ways. So a Facebook page costs the town. Yes, we pay a little bit in training, but that's well worth it. The upkeep costs the town basically nothing. And it's just a really easy way for the town and for residents to communicate with the police department. There's a lot of good that can come from it. And I think it's just kind of common sense.
So hopefully we'll see that come to fruition in the future.
Under this current mayor, I don't believe we will. I mean, it's been pretty clear that he's not in favor of a social media platform for the police department, but I think whether it's me or whoever comes next, I think that'll be one of the first things that gets done.
We need to get technology in town hall. I've always said that. All the years I lived here in Wallingford. Ed?
Again, we're talking with Riley O'Connell, a Democratic candidate for mayor of Wallingford. I have one more question, and it's kind of a philosophical question. I have. What's the best advice you received about making a run for mayor? And what advice would you give someone who may consider running for public office someday?
It's a good question, because one of the things I've done over the course of this campaign is I've reached out to just about every living person who's still based in Wallingford, who's ever challenged the mayor in the past 19 elections, and asked for their advice. Like, if they could do anything differently, what did they learn from their experience? And basically, building off of that as best we can. And I think the number one piece of advice partially advice that I got, but also kind of learning by, on the job, was, I spent years preparing so that I could do the job of mayor as well as possible, right? Never missed a town council meeting, board of ed meeting, planning and zoning meeting, all these things, and made sure, deeply familiar with the town charter, every town ordinance. All these things are crucial for doing the job of mayor. What I did not think of, or not necessarily realize when I first announced that I was running in February for this position, was that all that stuff's really important for doing the job of mayor. At best, it plays 10% into actually getting elected, right? Like, doing all this preparation for the job only helps so much for getting elected. The other 90% is how well you can campaign. And so while I had all this knowledge of the town and everything else, I didn't have experience campaigning. I'd never done it before. So that was a big learning curve. And I think that'll lead to the advice I would give to anyone else considering seeking office. Is the first advice is, if you're considering it, do it. We need people that want to be in office and want to take up that mantle to do it, especially younger people, not just people 25, but 40, 50. I mean, people that we've had more or less one generation in power for so long. It's more than time for that to start transitioning. And this is not just Wallingford, this is across the country. So other than encouraging folks that are interested to seek those offices, my real piece of advice in regards to the campaigning aspect is surround yourself with a great team. The only reason I won my caucus, I actually ended up unanimously getting the endorsement from the Democratic Town Committee. But the only reason we even won that caucus, and the only reason we're really well situated now with 30 days left until the election, is because I have a truly phenomenal team behind me. So many Wallingford-based folks I've known since I was a kid, who are entirely volunteer. They took this job, and that's also, I think, in itself just inspired me to work so hard, because my name's on the ballot, right? Like, I have every reason to want to give this my all. Their name's not on the ballot, and yet they're still behind the scenes working just as hard as I am on this campaign, simply because they love this town and they care about this town a lot. So the best advice I can give to anyone else who wants to do this is, no one can do this alone. People have tried, and it's just not possible. You will not get far. So surround yourself with people that have the expertise, have the experience, but most importantly, have your trust and have a good character to see it through. And it's been phenomenal to work with all these folks that I've had the pleasure of working with over the course of the past 7 months.
One final one for me. How important has social media been to you to get your message out to the public?
It's been hugely important. Our campaign, we don't really have much of a Twitter. I mean, we have a bit of a Twitter page, but it's mostly updating folks on where I'm going for events and stuff. But we have a really active Facebook page, really active Instagram, all these other things. And part of it's because one of the things I'm pushing for is just transparency, right? I want people to feel like they can reach me. And so far they have been able to reach me, whether it's my phone, whether it's by texting, whether it's by messaging me on Facebook, as often as possible. On top of that, it's just a great way to put your message out there, so people know. And my campaign website, against probably the advice of most or any campaign consultant, has pretty much every intricate detail of my platform, as opposed to letting people use their own imagination in terms of what I stand for. I make it very clear what I stand for and what my plans are, and social media has given me a platform to do that. Now, I want to preface that with, it's by no means enough on its own. I mean, like I said, social media is very important, but I spend the vast majority of my day every day going out door to door to door, because a lot of people aren't on social media still. And even social media, while it's a great tool, it's not enough to really truly have a full conversation with people and connect with people. So it will never be, I think, in my opinion, a replacement for true traditional, getting out there campaigning. But it is a really great tool that not just being utilized for the campaign, but I think it's an extremely important tool to be utilized once, hopefully, I would get into office, because it's a way that I can still reach constituents very consistently. They can message me directly, and even though I'll probably be even busier once I get in office, at least it's something that I can respond to people in relatively short order. So it's an important way to keep your elected officials within reach.
How can people reach you?
Sure. So there's a bunch of ways to reach me. Facebook's one of them. You can look up my O'Connell for Mayor Facebook page. Messaging me on that is pretty efficient. I also have my email, which is just O'Connell2021. My website, which is O'Connell2021.com. And then my email is just Riley@O'Connell2021.com. And then my phone number is also on the website as well. So people can just look it up there.
Okay.
Yeah, there's whatever way people are most comfortable reaching out to me is an option.
One more plug for the cookout this Sunday.
Sure. So I'll be at the cookout at 3 p.m. this Sunday at Community Lake, and I'll also be at Celebrate Wallingford probably all day tomorrow. Hopefully my dog Brunswick will make an appearance there as well.
It's gonna be a beautiful weekend this weekend.
It is. I couldn't be more excited. It didn't look like we were going to have these events, earlier in the summer, because we weren't sure how things were going to play out. But I'm super excited to go out there and probably stuff my face with more junk food than I probably should this week.
You can run it off.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on, Riley, that you'd like to mention?
No, I again, all my platforms online, and people are welcome to reach out to me. And I just want to thank you both so much. These were really excellent questions, and there's not too many opportunities and too many platforms in which I have the opportunity to go in depth on the issues that our town's facing and things we want to address. So thank you so much for having me on tonight.
It's been my pleasure.
Welcome.
My pleasure. Ed, I want to thank you as always, and want to thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
On, keep talking with Tom. On, keep talking with Tom. On. The best conversation for this generation. Always new points of view. All walks of life, spreading the light. And in time he will see you through. Log on, talking with Tom. Log on. Log on, talking with Tom. Log on, talking with Tom.